Back during COVID times, I've told some of you this story. Back during COVID, one of the first Sundays of COVID, I'm a very cranky COVID Sunday guy. I did not do well on Sunday mornings. We'd record the messages usually on Friday or Saturday. We'd post them on Sunday, and I would pace like a caged animal. I was an absolute crank box to be around. One Sunday morning, we had set a trap for a squirrel that was burying in under the front step of our home. And when I came out to check the trap, we did not have a squirrel. We had something else. We had a skunk in the trap. It was awesome. What a gift. A gift to our home. So I did what anybody would do. I called my father-in-law and I called my neighbors. I might have even called my father and said, what do I do with this skunk? I'm not quite sure what I'm allowed to do in the suburbs. I know what I'd do if I were out in the country, and what I would do out in the country is I would take it to the bottom of the hill, and I would throw the whole thing, trap and everything, in the water. I am not kidding, and I know this is being recorded. Call the Humane Society if you must. I didn't do that. What I did do was I threw a blanket over the cage, and I left the property. I thought maybe God will take this skunk home. Maybe the skunk will find a way out of the trap. And no such luck. Well, there's a whole story to the ordeal of getting the skunk in the back of my Toyota Corolla, driving out into the forest, being covered in cardboard boxes and a hockey stick, trying to cajole this skunk out of the trap. What does that have to do with what we've just read or with Advent? It has a great deal to do with it, actually. Because post-COVID, we are now in this state where we've kind of gotten familiar to the trappings of COVID. Why call and check in on a friend when you can just look at their Instagram account? Why go to church, get out of your pajamas when you can just log on online? Why don't go to class and get a university degree when you can take the class from home? Why go to small group when you can get teaching on the internet? Why, oh why, be involved in community ever again? We've learned that 30% of the North American evangelical church is now gone. Not leaving, gone. And they're not coming back. This can create incredible trauma and fear for those of us who are in church leadership, and we can start wringing our hands, panicking, wondering, oh my goodness, what do we do with all of this? And this morning, I'm happy to tell you there's an answer. I'm happy to tell you that the message of Advent could not be any more relevant for you and for me than it is today. The message that Jesus came down to heaven, from heaven, and dwelt among us is so very appropriate for every living human being, not even less for us as followers of Jesus. And so for the next 4 weeks, we're going to talk about this. Anybody know what this is? It's a manger. I was in Old Quebec City a week ago, and I wish Billy, by the way, on the 8th of January, we're going to be having a hymn singing service. And Billy has agreed to help quarterback that with me, and we have some other guests that are going to help with the music for this. But I wish Billy would be with me, because he, tongue-in-cheek, said, I wonder how you did in French Canada. I didn't do well. I didn't do well at all. I lived in chronic fear. But this thing is a manger. It's probably a more accurate depiction of a manger than the wooden mangers that we build. They've uncovered many of these in the Holy Land. They're carved out of rock. They're usually used to hold water, not hay, because grass is available around Bethlehem year-round. But it's carved out at various heights depending on the animal. Manger is related to manger, which is a French word for eat. So when I was at the Basilica in Old Quebec, if I had been there and would have been allowed to share in the Eucharist, which I'm not, but if I had been, the priest would have said, prenez, mangez, take, eat. Some of you have been in French services, or you've certainly been in Catholic services where that's been the mantra. Bethlehem means house of bread. And so it wasn't coincidence and it wasn't chance that Jesus found himself in a manger when he showed up so many years ago. It was also one of the signs that he was actually the Messiah. Go and you will find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes lying in a manger. We think, boy, what a frustrating night it must have been for Mary and Joseph. And it would have been, but it was not frustrating for God, because whenever things are chaotic and whenever things are in transition and whenever things are evolving, God seems to be the last person to panic. He's got this. He's got it under control. And so, when darkness hovered over the face of the deep, recorded in Genesis chapter 1, when there was nothing but chaos in the universe, God spoke and order came. When the people of God were wondering, where do we go? God spoke, and a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night led his people home. 300 years of silence between Malachi and Matthew. And what does God do? He shows up in bodily form. Eugene Peterson says that Jesus took on flesh and moved into the neighborhood. Isn't that beautiful? So the challenge for us for the next 4 weeks is we're going to look at from cradle to table, the first supper that night in Bethlehem to the last supper when Jesus celebrated communion with his people. These two relative bookends have a lot in common that speak to themes that we should probably take seriously. And today is make room. Make room. The carol singer says, prepare him room in every heart. And in Mark chapter 14, you can read it if you'd like along with me. Mark chapter 14, we read, on the first day, verse 12, if you have your Bibles. If not, it'll be online, or you'll find it this afternoon. On the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when it was customary to sacrifice the Passover lamb, Jesus' disciples asked him, where do you want us to go and make preparations for you to eat the Passover? So he sent two of his disciples, telling them, go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him. Say to the owner of the house he enters, the teacher asks, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? Now, how pretentious is that? Can you imagine walking in downtown Charlottetown and somebody interrupts you and says, where's my guest room for the night? See, God was already at work. God was already preparing behind the scenes. The disciples would have been panicking. We're behind the 8 ball. There's a lot that goes into preparation for the Passover meal. He will show you to a large upper room, and here's the key, furnished and ready. He'll show you to a large upper room already ready. One of the questions that I have around Christmas is, am I really ready for Jesus? Think about this. It's not some cliche question. Do we really want all that Jesus represents? This is relevant post-COVID, isn't it? Do we really want to be breathing somebody else's germs in this place for 40 minutes, an hour and a half? You in the front row, do you really want sprayed like you're in SeaWorld by my germs every Sunday? Do we really want this? In fact, many of us have actually made the church kind of a consumer marketplace. What do I want in church? I want good music. I want good things for my kids. I want good things for my youth. I want men's ministry. I want women's ministry. I want divorce care. I want grief share. I want addiction stuff. I want. What do we want from Jesus? What do we expect from him? And so, what we often answer, especially as a small church, we tend to want community. Now, here's where my holidays really breathe life into this for me. I experience 3 types of community, at least, on my holidays. The first one is a really funny story, and I could stretch this out. But not being able to speak French, all I know are curse words. And you might judge me, but that's pretty much all you know too. So I couldn't introduce conversations with certain curse words. I had to learn ça de bain again. I had to learn je ne comprends pas. I had to learn pardonnez-moi, manger. I had to learn a few basic words, but I was terrified, absolutely terrified that I might have to use them. The first night went reasonably well until I was on an elevator, and in comes bouncing a very charismatic French woman who has no understanding that I know nothing that she is saying. And she is talking without taking a breath. It's one long run-on sentence as if I know everything about her. Ladies and gentlemen, I had no sweet clue who she was, and I was on the 4th floor. She was on the 5th floor. We had a long way to go in my time. And she just kept going, and finally I went like this. I said, je ne comprends pas, and she just laughed and kept right on going. I was praying, Jesus, take me home. There's a certain amount of community that you and I live in. By the way, this is how first-timers to church feel. If we don't know the people and we don't know the language, the church religious kind of format, this is exactly how they feel when the door clunks in the parking lot to when they get in their seats. Like, oh my goodness, please don't talk to me, please don't say anything. Unless you're hyper-charismatic. And for those of you who are introverts, this is how you feel every week. Every week. And we're all friends here, and we speak the same language. Erica is like, oh yeah, I go home for a nap every Sunday just to get rid of y'all. Right? It's true. That's one level of community. But it's such a very, very limited level. We might be in the same space, going to the same place, but as far as really connecting with one another, it simply is not the case. This is what I feel is happening in our culture nowadays. We're utilitarian. We'll go to the same room, we'll hang out with the same people only if we're going in the same direction. And if we're not going in the same direction, we have no capacity to coexist anymore. If you don't agree with me about politics, if you don't agree with me about religion, if you don't agree with me about economics, if you don't agree, we're out. We're tuning out, we're zoning out, we're cutting you out. This is the world in which we live, and this is the world in which Jesus came from heaven for. There was another sense of community. It was the marketplace. I preferred the marketplace because this market that we were in Quebec City was beautiful, and it was crowded. So I could slip into the marketplace, and I could look the part because I was human. That's all it took, was for me to be a human being. And I could browse, and I could mingle, and I could pop in and pop out. I could overhear and see if they were speaking English or not. And if they weren't, I could run away, and nobody would know. It was wonderful. This is what bigger environments do for us. Bigger churches do this for us, don't they? We can swoop in, we can swoop out, we can come in, come out, and not get too integrated. It's safe. It's far more comfortable. We can get lost. But yet again, there's no transformative work that happens in the marketplace, is there? We are browsing. We are shopping. We are enjoying the vibe, but we're not necessarily being integrated. What really changed me was the third level of community, and that was family. Being trapped in a car with Crystal, and I say that in a good way. The only time Crystal and I don't do well in the car is when she's making a decision in the middle of an intersection and I'm in the middle of the intersection driving. That's the only time it doesn't go well. If her map and Siri or Google Maps and the reality that there's cars on all sides of us do not get along, that's the only time it doesn't work well, and it wouldn't work well for any of you either. However, walking hand in hand with her through the streets, talking and praying for you, that changes a person. Disagreeing on things and agreeing on things, discussing things, dreaming about things. This too is a critical part of our world, and this is the community, hear this, this is the community that Jesus in his incarnation came to bring. You see, we can't have Jesus without acknowledging that he is fully human. If he wasn't fully human, he couldn't have died for your sins. But we can't have him without acknowledging he was fully God. Because if he wasn't fully God, he can't forgive you of your sins. He came to integrate into humanity. And he's going to do so again. The challenge is, how do we prepare him room? What was the hymn writer saying when he said, in every heart, prepare him room? What was demonstrated that day and that night in Bethlehem? Well, first of all, I think what's demonstrated is people are still every bit as spiritual now as they've ever been. The difference is that the energy that used to be consolidated just into religion is now being spread out into all different kinds of things. Maybe various religions. So, for example, in Old Quebec City, there were dozens of churches, almost all of them concentrated into the Catholic faith. Now, if you're to drive around Prince Edward Island, you're seeing churches of every religious background meeting in people's homes. In fact, even unchurchy things are religious. This is why yoga, for example, is not practiced just so that you have a stronger core and more flexibility. It's practiced to bring order between your soul and your body. And it's taking off. This is why the gym called Soul Cycle is not about getting in shape, it's about finding your soul, they announce. This is why some folks who go to CrossFit leverage the phrase, CrossFit is my church. We are every bit as spiritual as we ever were. There's as much of a hunger and a desire to bring a disembodied world into union with something tangible. And the church is partly to blame for the lack, ladies and gentlemen. There's a school of thought called Gnosticism. And it basically says that everything that's here on the earth is bad and evil. If we only listen to our own hearts enough, we can ascend and reach this level of purity and righteousness that sooner or later will lead us to heaven. Unfortunately, that runs completely contrary to the gospel. Jesus says, no, you don't build a tower like they did in Babel. Instead, I will come to you. I will come for you. And so when we start wringing our hands in despair, thinking, oh, we live in such a secular society, not really. We are every bit as spiritually hungry as we ever were. We're just looking in so many other directions. Even on Prince Edward Island, the Wiccan movement, for example, is going through the roof. These are folks that worship the created, not the creator. They worship Earth. They worship Mother Earth. They worship the signs in the sky instead of the one that created those signs. It's going through the roof. There's so much incredible diversity now of where the vigor is going. So the first challenge in really preparing room for Jesus is to acknowledge that we're still hungry for what Jesus has to offer. All of us are. All of us are. As far back as Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3. And when God was creating and making order of things, he even acknowledged it is not good for man to be alone. Let's remedy that. Let's solve that. So, secondly, what the remedy is not are shinier programs. We might be thinking, okay, people are spiritual, but they're distracted. They're going off to this, they're going off to that, they're chasing that religion. Maybe we should just buy a new program and we could implement that. We could hire Ben. Yeah, he'll fix everything. Or military might. We just need to overpower, and this could be also shifted with political might too. We can overpower the enemy. We can impose righteousness and righteous ideals on our society. Yeah, that will work. Or maybe a new business plan. Maybe better arguments to make people not be able to escape this thing about Jesus. The reality is, though, that none of those things will work. The solution is what John calls the Logos. The Logos. In John 1, verse 14, we read, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." Now, the original hearers of this verse, the Greeks, would have viewed logos, which is the word for word here, as this principle. It's where we get the word logic or logical. Logos for the Greeks was this principle that brought everything into order in the middle of the universe. It was a philosophy. It was an understanding of how things worked. John here turns all of that on its head and says, no, the solution is not in a philosophy. The solution is in a person. Can we make room for a person? Can we make room for Jesus? Now, here's what making room for the Logos causes us to do. It's going to cause us to kind of shed some of our faith in religious structures. We're seeing this happen whether we like it or not. Where we often fall off the wagon is we forget Jesus in that. We shed the religious structures called deconstructing our faith, but we don't take on a new understanding of who Jesus really is and what his role really serves for us. It causes us to reject utilitarian religion. Jesus declares himself to be the point. In other words, don't just go to Jesus for what he can give you. Go to Jesus for Jesus. Are you with me? Are we okay? Still on the same team. My tires still have air in them. Right? We hope. Finally, what making room for Jesus causes us to do is to promote both grace and truth. Now, doesn't this sit in our backyard today? It seems that we're living in a culture where you get to promote one or the other. You promote truth, but that allows you to be a jerk while doing it. Or it's a prerequisite to do it. There's no way to promote truth unless you're a complete bonehead to other people. Or you promote grace, which means just agreeing with what everybody else has to say. Into this dilemma came the Logos. Into this dilemma came not a new philosophy, but Jesus, the person. In other words, don't try to out-argue everybody. Point people to Jesus. In other words, don't try to out-kind everybody. Point people to Jesus. Now, this is what's hard about church discipline. Church discipline is a profound anchor point in the church, but is rooted in the person and the personality of Christ, not merely on a doctrine. When it's just on a doctrine, it's fundamentalism. It's just, well, this is what our policy says, Marina. Don't drink coffee in church. And how many of y'all have been in churches like that? Of equal and maybe even greater concern is living with just grace and saying, I'll live my best life, you live your best life. And we'll just all pretend that everything is okay. That's a departure from Jesus, who said, I am what? The way, the truth, and the life. Not my words, his. Are you capable of preparing room for a God like that? To prepare him room means that we don't take him for granted. I'm coming in for a landing here. In other words, by taking him for granted, we're kind of used to his forgiveness, aren't we? It's like the dating game. I'm good at sinning. He's good at forgiving. Seems like a perfect match. Denies grace of its power, though. See, grace reminds us that we're not entitled to all these things. It's out of his mercy. It's out of his goodness. And we have been blessed with the capacity to be better, to do better, to respond in ways that are not hemmed in by our own selfish desires. To prepare him room means to open ourselves up in awe. I struggle with what it must have been like that first night for Mary and Joseph. I don't know how romantic it was. I was reminded this morning of the time when I helped birth a llama out at Island Hill Farm. It was absolutely horrifically disgusting. I never, ever, ever want to be a part of anything remotely like that again. No, you're laughing like I'm kidding, but I'm not. I think I'm traumatized. We better move on. I don't know if it was awesome or if it was not, but I do know this. The number of times I've been in a room where a mother has laid eyes on her firstborn for the first time, the gaze is always the same. No matter how ugly that baby is, according to the mother, it is the most awesome thing on the face of the earth. And grandparents, y'all are even worse. Some of you have been through an awful lot of Christmases. It's tough to be open to awe in a fresh way. Preachers are working hard to try to put spin on it, to be creative about it, to add more dynamics to it. And some of you are struggling with awe just because you flat out don't want to. Life is too hard. And I am not here to judge you for that this morning. I'm acknowledging fully the fearful posture it must put you in to say, perhaps there is beauty in this thing. Perhaps there's something left to be discovered that I've not discovered yet. And to make him room puts yourself in a posture of tremendous risk. What if he lets you down? What if Christmas isn't what you hope it might be? That's the risk of making room for Jesus all over again. And finally, what it does is it causes us to move into our neighborhood. As Christ was the first supper, as he took the very posture and place of being in a manger where animals would come and either drink water, he became the water through which no one will thirst ever again, or come to eat, he became the body and the blood that's our redemptive quality from heaven. Regardless, he moved into his neighborhood. Making room for Jesus means we can no longer afford to be so heavenly minded we're no earthly good. Well, God cares about spiritual things. We're going to compartmentalize God in this. He doesn't care about physical health. He doesn't care about food security. He doesn't care about reconciliation between races or genders. He doesn't care about these things. That's all earthly stuff. God doesn't care about those things. No. The incarnate God, Jesus the Christ. As we interpret incarnation means God in meat. He put on flesh so that what happens to your body and what happens to your community and what happens to your province matters to him. It should matter to us. I wonder, in this world that's disembodied, segregated, broken apart, I wonder how long we're going to believe that education is our solution. That we just need to get the word out there. Do you remember back when they said we just need to educate more people and we won't have AIDS anymore? Remember that? Remember when we were teaching in schools, we just need to educate people about tobacco and we won't have addiction to tobacco anymore? Remember that? In the motel we were in, there were signs saying, "You can help us save the planet." When, oh when, will at least the church recognize we get to be in a posture where we create a room and make it ready for Jesus, for the Logos, more than a new philosophy, more than a new way of being, but a person who can point us the way home.